For years, the idea of healing trauma has been misunderstood. We have been taught to leave the past behind, to forget, to move on, as if pain can simply be erased. But what if this very effort is what keeps you stuck? What if trying to forget is the reason you cannot heal? From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, this approach is not only incomplete, it is dangerous. Because trauma does not disappear when ignored. It fragments, it hides, it continues to exist beneath awareness, like something silent but active. It enters your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors, and slowly it begins to shape them, without you even realizing. If it is not faced consciously, trauma transforms into what Jung called an autonomous complex, a part of the psyche that lives on its own, with its own reactions, its own impulses, its own logic, often in conflict with who you think you are. These inner fragments do not disappear in the dark. They grow there. They appear in moments of crisis, in patterns that sabotage you, in choices that repeat the same pain, as if something inside you keeps returning to the same wound, again and again. Jung noticed something deeper. Many people do not only experience trauma, they become identified with it. Their identity forms around the pain, and without realizing, they begin to live as the wound itself. In that state, healing feels threatening, because to heal would mean losing the only story they know about themselves. This is the hidden prison. Not the trauma itself, but the attachment to it. While many approaches try to remove the pain or silence it, Jung offers a completely different path, not to escape it, not to erase it, but to face it, to go into it with awareness, to understand it, to recover what was lost within it, and to integrate it into who you are becoming. From this perspective, trauma is not something to delete. It is something that must find meaning, not to justify suffering, but to transform it into understanding, into strength, into awareness. Because true healing is not the absence of pain, it is the integration of it. Many people believe that healing means forgetting, erasing memories, controlling triggers, silencing the discomfort. And if the pain is still there, they think they have failed. But this belief is an illusion, a dangerous one, because trauma is not something foreign that can simply be removed. It becomes part of the psyche itself. And when it is not understood, it does not vanish. It changes form. It becomes those autonomous complexes, fragments of the personality, split off from conscious awareness, operating on their own. They are created when the mind cannot bear what it has experienced, so it separates. It isolates the pain from the rest of the self. But what is separated is not gone. It is waiting. And until it is seen, understood, and integrated, it continues to live within you. But what is pushed away is not erased. It remains alive at the edges of awareness. And this is where the real problem begins. Because what is hidden does not stay still. It acts. An autonomous complex can be triggered by something small, a word, a tone of voice, a sensation in the body. And suddenly, everything changes. You react with intensity, or you freeze, and you do not know why, because it is not rational, it is not conscious, it is the complex taking control. In those moments, as Carl Gustav Jung described, it feels as if your personality has been hijacked. You are no longer responding to the present. You are reacting to something unresolved, something old, still trying to express itself. This is why people explode in anger over something small, why fear appears, even when there is no danger, why relationships repeat the same destruction again and again. And here is the irony. The more you try to forget the trauma, the stronger it becomes. Because what is ignored moves deeper. And what is not faced begins to shape your life, as if it were fate. Trying to move on without awareness does not heal. It feeds the suffering. It is like covering a deep wound with something superficial. From the outside, it looks fine, but underneath, it continues to spread. Real healing requires something else. It requires descent, going back to the root, facing directly what has been avoided, bringing into light what was pushed into darkness. But this raises a question. How does this transformation happen? How does something unconscious become integrated? And what exactly are these complexes that seem to have a will of their own? To understand this, we need to go deeper, because the psyche is not a single, unified thing. As Jung observed, it is composed of many parts, some of them completely outside awareness. And when these parts are shaped by trauma, they gain intensity. They become independent. These are autonomous complexes. But what are they, really? At their core, a complex is formed around an emotional memory, usually pain, fear, shame, or humiliation, an experience that the mind could not process. So it separates it. It removes it from conscious identity. But what is excluded does not disappear. It fragments and begins to operate on its own. Not as a literal being, but as a functional one, with its own logic, its own reactions, its own direction. And this is why some reactions feel disproportionate. A small criticism creates intense anger. A compliment creates discomfort or even anxiety. A healthy relationship is suddenly sabotaged without clear reason, because these are not conscious choices. They are activations, moments when the past enters the present. And over time, these complexes do more than create reactions. They shape patterns. They influence beliefs. They begin to define how you see yourself. And slowly, they build an identity around them. Many people live their lives guided by patterns they do not see. Patterns that repeat, almost like rituals, again and again, as if something inside is trying to finish what was never completed. But without awareness, there is no resolution, only repetition. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, unintegrated trauma does not stay in the past. It returns in cycles. The same situations appear again. The same dynamics take form. The same pain repeats, sometimes with different people, but the same core, a wound seeking resolution. For example, someone who experienced rejection may unconsciously enter relationships where rejection happens again, not because they want to suffer, but because something within them is trying to understand, to complete what was left open. The unconscious is not trying to punish you. It is trying to finish a story. But without awareness, it cannot transform. It can only repeat, and each repetition deepens the wound. This is the tragedy. The mind seeks closure, but finds only cycles. And over time, something even more subtle happens. The complex becomes stronger, so strong that it begins to merge with identity. You no longer just experience the pain, you become it. The victim becomes the identity. The rejected becomes the rejected one. The wounded becomes the fragile one. And from that place, change feels dangerous. Because if the pain disappears, what remains? Who are you without that story? This is the hidden trap. Identification with the wound, one of the strongest barriers to real healing. And it happens silently, almost invisibly. One of the most unsettling insights that Jung revealed is this: trauma does not only leave marks, it shapes identity. Over time, pain is no longer just a memory, it becomes a mirror. And if you look into that mirror for too long, you begin to believe that what you see is who you are. This is what Jung called identification with the complex. When trauma is intense and remains unintegrated, it becomes the center. Everything begins to revolve around it. Your beliefs, your relationships, your choices, your perception of the world, all filtered through pain. And the most dangerous part? You do not notice it. It happens without awareness, without intention. Identification with the victim is not a desire to suffer. It is not weakness. It is an unconscious strategy, a way to hold yourself together. Because when everything feels unstable, the psyche searches for something constant. And if pain was the most powerful experience in your life, then the mind clings to it as an anchor, as a center, even if that center is suffering, because without it, it can feel like there is nothing left, no story, no identity, no self. And this is why so many people resist healing, not consciously, but deeply, not because they want to suffer, but because they fear what comes after, the unknown. Who are you without the trauma? Who are you without the anger that protects you, without the fear that guides you, without the sadness that defines you? Pain is heavy, but uncertainty can feel even heavier. And so the cycle continues. We return to what hurts us. We repeat what breaks us. We sabotage ourselves in the moments that matter most. We attract neglect, rejection, abandonment, not because we are weak, not because we do not understand, but because something inside believes this is all that exists. From the view of Carl Gustav Jung, these behaviors are not random. They are attempts to resolve what was never resolved. The unconscious is trying to close the wound, but without awareness, it does not know how. So it repeats, as if reliving the same pain could somehow change the ending. But the ending never changes. Not until the story is seen clearly, not until it is rewritten with awareness. And this changes everything. Because healing is no longer about forgetting or escaping. It becomes a process of separation. Separating who you are from what happened to you. Undoing the fusion with pain, rediscovering yourself beyond the wound. Dissolving a prison you did not even know existed. But how is this done? How do you undo years, sometimes decades, of unconscious identification? How do you see what is truly yours and what was shaped by pain? To answer this, we must go deeper, into the process itself. Because for Jung, healing was not superficial. It was a descent, a conscious journey into the darkest parts of the psyche, where trauma was buried and where it still lives. This journey unfolds in 3 stages, 3 essential movements: confrontation, recovery, integration. The first is confrontation, and it requires courage because it asks you to look directly at the wound, not from a distance, not through analysis alone, but with presence, with feeling, to return to what was avoided, without escaping, without minimizing, without explaining it away, just being there, fully, feeling what was never allowed to be felt. Because as Jung understood, what is repressed does not disappear. It returns, distorted, stronger, more destructive. This is why avoidance is not protection. It is postponement. And true confrontation is not about reliving the trauma. It is about meeting it consciously for the first time. It is facing it as a conscious witness, the moment when you stop running and begin to see. The ego no longer denies, no longer escapes. It turns toward what was broken and slowly begins to gather. what was fragmented. This is the beginning of reclaiming yourself, but this leads to the second stage, recovery. Because trauma does not only take peace, it takes parts of you. A child's spontaneity can disappear. A strong voice can fall silent. Trust can collapse. Joy can fade. The ability to love freely can shut down. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, these are not gone. They are hidden, protected, withdrawn into the unconscious as a form of survival. Jung described this as a loss of soul, fragments of your being that detached to keep you safe. And now, they must be found again. This stage is like inner archaeology. You go inward and search, not just for memories, but for living parts that still exist within you, waiting to return. And it is not enough to understand them. You must live them again, to laugh again, to trust again, to feel desire, to create, to allow life to move through you, to bring back what trauma froze. And then comes the third stage, integration. But not just any integration, symbolic integration. Here, something changes. The goal is no longer to remove the pain, but to understand it, to give it meaning, because as Jung saw, the unconscious speaks through symbols. And when trauma is understood symbolically, it transforms. It is no longer just destruction. It becomes a doorway. This does not mean you justify the pain. It means you see what emerged from it. Strength, depth, clarity, compassion, qualities that would never have awakened without the descent. The wound does not vanish, but it changes form. It becomes a mark, and that mark, when understood, becomes power. As Jung expressed, we do not heal by denying the darkness, but by bringing light into it. And when the darkness is illuminated, it loses its control. These stages, confrontation, recovery, integration, are not linear. They move in cycles. You return to the same places, but each time with more awareness, more strength, more clarity, and slowly something shifts. The trauma is no longer in control. It is no longer the center. It becomes part of the story, not the whole identity. The wound becomes a scar, and a scar does not dominate. It teaches. The pain may remain, but it no longer defines you. It is something you have moved through, not something you are trapped inside. And from here, a new question emerges. What does it mean to live with the scar instead of the wound? What does life look like when trauma is no longer a tyrant, but a teacher? Because true freedom does not come from denying pain. It comes from integrating what you have lived through. What you are looking for is not somewhere outside, and it is not something you can buy. It is something you must face, because healing does not come from escaping. It comes from transformation. Most people believe that to heal means to go back to who they were, before the pain, as if there was once a perfect version of them, untouched, unbroken. But from the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, this idea is an illusion. Healing is not a return, it is a transformation. You do not go back to who you were. You become someone new, someone who could not exist without what you lived through. The scar is not a defect, it is a mark of evolution. When trauma is truly integrated, it loses its control. It does not disappear, but it no longer acts from the shadows. It no longer decides for you. It becomes memory, a memory. You understand. You still remember what hurt you. But now, you choose how to respond. This is the shift from reaction to awareness, from autopilot to presence. You stop repeating the past and begin to live consciously. As Jung described, this is the integration of the unconscious into the self. The trauma becomes part of a larger meaning. It aligns with your story and transforms into wisdom. Not abstract wisdom, not theoretical knowledge, but lived understanding. The kind that comes from surviving what once felt impossible and emerging with depth, with strength, with compassion. This transformation does not come easily. It is not given. It is earned through confrontation, through descent, through crossing into the unknown. And what you find at the end of that crossing is not a repaired version of who you were, but something deeper, more real, more whole. At that point, trauma changes meaning. It is no longer a curse. It becomes a turning point, a moment that revealed everything. It showed where you were wounded. It showed what needed to be reclaimed. It revealed strength that only appears in darkness. And the scar becomes a symbol, a story. But now, it is your story to tell, not a force that controls you, because there is a difference. The wound paralyzes. The scar guides. The wound keeps you stuck. The scar reminds you of what you overcame, that you have been broken and rebuilt yourself, that you have faced fear and did not disappear, that you reached the bottom and came back. For Jung, this is the true process of healing, an alchemy where suffering is transformed into consciousness. But this path is not meant to be walked alone, because the journey of becoming whole is demanding. It requires support. It requires presence. It requires courage, again and again. And even after integration, the journey continues, because healing is not an ending. It is a beginning, a new way of living, a new relationship with your past, a new awareness in the present to live without being pulled by what once controlled you, to move forward with clarity, with depth, with choice. Because healing trauma is not reaching a finish line. It is stepping into a new life. When you finally face what you have avoided for so long, something shifts, not outside, but within you. You do not free yourself from the past. You free yourself in the present. The memories remain, but they no longer control you. The pain is no longer the center. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, true liberation does not come from repression. It comes from integration. What you repress shapes your destiny. What you integrate becomes your strength. And this is why the journey inward, no matter how uncomfortable, is always more powerful than escape. To live with awareness after trauma does not mean you no longer feel pain. It means you are no longer ruled by it. The emotions may still come, but they do not invade you. They arrive like visitors. They knock, and now you choose whether to open the door. You can meet them with awareness. You can understand where they come from and decide how to respond. This is the essence of becoming whole, not perfection, but wholeness. To see your darkness without shame. To say, this happened to me, but also, this does not define me. To carry compassion, not only for others, but for yourself, because you know what it means to carry something heavy and still move forward. This kind of maturity cannot be learned from shortcuts. It does not come from theory alone. It is built through courage, through honesty, through facing your own story with open eyes and an open heart. With open eyes and an open heart, because the moment you stop running is the moment you begin to live as a whole human being. The scar remains, it always will, but it no longer bleeds. Now it shines. And if something within you recognized itself in these words, then perhaps something has already begun. a quiet awareness, a deeper honesty, a willingness to look within. And from here, the path continues. Not as escape, but as understanding, not as fear, but as courage. Because healing was never an end. It was always a beginning.